So I just want to do a very brief summary of the concept of bad faith as it appears in existentialist philosophy, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre in his book Being Nothingness. I'll be referring to the new translation by Sarah Richmond of Being Nothingness that's just come out. Very good translation, very good sort of scholarly apparatus on that bad boy. You can fit so much scholarly apparatus in there. So anyway, Sarah Richmond did a great job with that translation. So the basic idea of bad faith is a lie, but a lie that we tell to oneself. So this is very different from the way we usually think of deceit, because there's no conflict within myself. I know what the truth is, and I tell a lie to someone else. So I know the truth, and because I know the truth, I'm capable of consciously deceiving the other, to tell them what I know is not true when I tell them the lie. When we think about lying to ourselves, though, that is a strange thing to do, because I have to know the truth if I'm going to lie about it. But I also, if I'm to be deceived by the lie that I tell myself, I must also sort of not know the truth. So I have to hide something somewhere and then forget where I hid it, or something like that, right, with bad faith. So what happens in bad faith is that I play on a few dualities that crop up in human existence. So the big duality that Sartre focuses on is the facticity of my existence. So that's just the fact that I exist at this place and this time with this body, with this particular path that I'm traveling, this history that's mine, with these people in the institutions that I've been in, my schools, my religious institutions, whatever social groups that I'm in, my circle of friends and so on. Just the fact that I exist in a particular place and time in this situation in a body particularly is important there, right? Then I am also a transcendence. So because I exist in time as a being in time, I'm also overcoming this facticity constantly. I'm becoming what I'm not. I'm becoming something different and other than what I am at any given moment. I'm a student, and I'm transcending my being as a student in order to become a graduate. And when I graduate from school, I won't be a student any longer. That part of me will have been negated, and it will go into the past and appear as a facticity. At one time, I was a student, but I've transcended that and moved on into the future and become something else. This is what Sartre means when he says stuff like, I am what I am not, and I am not what I am, because of this transcendence, which is more sort of at the core of my being. I'm always overcoming my facticity. I never coincide with just one being, that I am unchanging. So bad faith will play on this duality. It will relish the facticity and present the facticity as the transcendence, or it will go vice versa and act as if that transcendence is like a thing. So I will trade on this. The example that Sartre gives for this particular duality is the young woman that appears on a date. And she would like to sort of enjoy the evening. She'd like to enjoy her date. And in order to do that, she undergoes a project of bad faith where she plays this game with herself so that she can put off the decision of whether or not she's going to have to accept her date's advances. She knows that some of her date's behavior indicates these future possibilities. There's the transcendence. It indicates that she might have to make a decision about whether or not to sleep with this guy, whether or not to give him a kiss at the door, whether or not to see him again, go on another date or whatever. So there's decisions that are going to have to be made about the future and about the course of her life. And again, once those decisions are made and she acts, the act then becomes facticity. But in order to enjoy the evening, she would prefer not to worry about all of that. So she's trying to defer the decision about these things down the road. And so she plays this game with herself where um, the lie is in the oscillation, in that flip flopping back and forth between indulging your transcendence enough to sort of enjoy things in the moment while throwing them constantly back into their facticity as if they were just whatever they were in that one moment and were not going to become something actually further down the line. So she keeps herself in this interplay between her transcendence and facticity. So she has her hand on the table, and the date puts his hand on hers, kind of makes a move, right? She doesn't want to make the decision about the significance of that move, and so she leaves her hand there. So she allows her hand to become just like an object, as if it's not part of her person and her transcendent movement into the future. But she also treats it with just enough transcendence that she can get a little bit of enjoyment out of the touch, right? So that she's not making the decision right then and there. So that's one way that we sort of lie to ourselves, by playing this game between indulging in our transcendence for the enjoyment of the moment while keeping everything locked at a surface level of its facticity. There's nothing deeper or any more meaningful than when the date says, you look pretty tonight. That's it. It's just the fact of that utterance and its facticity right on the surface. There's no deeper implication of receiving a compliment like that on a date there. So that's one form of bad faith. The other way that bad faith can operate, for instance, is I am for myself, of course. I have my projects and so on and so forth, but I also appear as an object to the other. I'm also for others. And so the example Sartre uses here is the waiter in the cafe who's playing at being a waiter. They present themselves for the other in this particular role, while playing sort of a game for themselves, attempting to occupy the role of the waiter. And so their movements become very sort of like mechanical, very scripted, because of the social role that they're playing. Waiters are supposed to do certain things. And to fit themselves into that role, they have to ignore a whole host of things about their future projects and their transcendence in that sense, right? The waiter playing the role of the waiter forgets his roles with his family at home, or doesn't try to like indulge in, that kind of after work I'm going to have to go and do this, and I have some homework, and that's involved in this other project of going to school, and I want to graduate, and all that stuff sort of gets brushed aside into the background while the waiter performs this role of being a waiter. So again, using his facticity to hide his transcendence while he performs a role for the other, literally at the service for the other in the waiter example, so that he can appear before the other as this kind of being, the service worker that will fulfill the needs of the patrons of the establishment that they work at. Right? So playing between being for myself and being for the other, playing between being a transcendence and being facticity. Again, bad faith becomes a sort of metastable state. People can maintain it and even go through a lot of their life in bad faith, but inevitably, because they're always playing around with that transcendence and being for itself, the mask slips and you are sort of faced with the reality, specifically the reality of your freedom, and that you have to make these just choices, and that you never can come to rest in the facticity of the moment and just sit there like a object, like a rock. You have to take your project up and move forward and do all that kind of stuff. Now, why do people do this? Why bad faith? The short story there is they want to avoid their freedom and the responsibility that comes from it. I mean, that's most clear in the example of the woman on the date. In this particular example, that decision is a weighty one, to whether or not to continue to date a person, whether or not to sleep with them. It's something that, in her freedom, the woman kind of agonizes over. I mean, You can think of someone in a situation where they like a person well enough to go on a date. They think that there's maybe some potential there. They're attracted to them in some way, so they've agreed to the date. But they're not sure how far it wants to go, if they're ready for a commitment, if they're ready, if that person is the one to whom they want to commit, and all that kind of stuff. And so we play this game of bad faith with ourselves in order to not have to put off and defend ourselves from the agony of that decision. And so it's really our freedom. That's what if bad faith is at all related to fear, it's a fear of our freedom and a fear of ourself. That we want to disburden ourselves of the responsibility of our choice. And so we play this game of self-deception so we can try to make it seem to ourselves like we won't have to make the choice. That's therein is the sort of lie. We can kick that can down the road. But of course, inevitably it will come, and the facade of bad faith will crack, and we'll see through it a little bit. So Sartre calls this a metastable. So you can maintain it more or less, but it's always going to the cracks are always going to show, and the mask is going to slip off, and you'll be able to see through it there. So there's one more example that Sartre discusses in Bad Faith about a homosexual man who is being pressured to come out by his friend. That particular example, actually, I would like to make a separate video about, because Sartre's examples sometimes, of course, are very much his examples, which means they can tend toward, they can sometimes be misogynistic, or perhaps they can be, I think there are some problems with this example of the gay man. And I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit more about what do we actually get out of that passage. Is it salvageable, or is it really just a problematic example? So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, because I do think there are real problems with Sartre's treatment of that particular subject. But I also think his general analysis of bad faith is interesting, and there are actually some insights to that particular passage that we shouldn't just sort of abandon it. So we'll spend a little bit more time talking about that in another video. But the purpose of this was just to give you a general overview of bad faith, lying to yourself, in order to put off responsibility and flee from your freedom, which of course is impossible. You're stuck with it, and so you'll always catch a glimpse of it. It will always sort of hit you that you're just playing a game, and the decision is going to have to ultimately be made. Okay, so that's bad faith. Enjoy.